going to continue with our 9-4. So the next part that we're going to deal with is the actual solving using factoring. And so we're going to use what you just did with the zero product property, and we're going to use that information to help us once we have finished factoring. So we're going to start with some equation such as x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Now, number one big important thing, you must be in standard form. Remember that is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So you have to have the x squared term first, then the x, then your constant equals 0. So if you are not in that form, the first thing you need to do is rearrange it so that you get to that form. Okay, and you want to make sure that everything is in the correct order also. X squared, then x, then constant. So just being set equal to 0 is not good enough. Make sure they're all in the correct order and you have all your like terms combined and all of that. So if we look here, we have the x squared, then we have x, and then we have our constant, and we're equal to 0. So we are in standard form, in which case we can continue. Now, back in lesson, let me think, 8-5. That is the lesson you learned to factor. I would highly recommend that you go back and look at those notes. You can go to our block algebra Google Classroom and you can watch the video if you need more video examples on factoring. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple with you now, but you might need more than just the couple that I go through, and you can look at those videos to help you. So once you are in this form, you are in standard form and you are set equal to 0, you can factor this trinomial like you learned back in 8-5. Okay, so in 8-5 you learned that the way to factor this is you start by identifying a, b, and c. A is the number in front of x squared, which in our case, there's an imaginary 1. B is the number that is in front of x, which in our case is 6. And C is your constant, which in our case is 5. You do want to make sure you are paying attention to your negatives and your positives. So all of ours are positive, no issues there. But if you did have like -6, you'd put that as a -6. Now, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to take A and C, and you're going to multiply those two numbers. 1 times 5 is 5. To continue, you're going to have to use Desmos to help you. You need to look for two numbers that multiply to be the answer you just got, which was 5. The same two numbers need to also add to get whatever B is, which in our case is 6. Okay, so two numbers that multiply to be A times C, and same two numbers need to add to be B. This, you can go to Desmos and type that in. Okay, so if I come to Desmos and I type in x times y equals 5, and in the next line x plus y equals 6, and then if you need to, you can move your graph around or whatever until you find your two numbers. Look at where your two graphs, your two intersect. So I've got 1, 5. If you look here, remember they're supposed to be the same numbers. They're just in opposite order. So your two numbers are 1 and 5. So those are the numbers we're going to use. Now, it is not always going to be that they match these numbers. Okay, that is not what happens. It happened here, but it will not always happen. So now to factor, you have two sets of parentheses. The first part in both parentheses is your variable, which in our case is x. The second part in each set of parentheses are the two numbers you got from Desmos, 1 and 5. Both positive, so put your plus signs. And now you would be done if this is 8-5, but because we are trying to solve, you have to make sure you remember you set it equal to 0. And now this looks just like it did in the last part. You take your part here in this set of parentheses, set it equal to 0, and you take your other part in your other set of parentheses, and set it equal to 0. And then you would solve. Subtracting 1 here gives you x equals -1. Subtracting 5 here would give you x equals -5. And there are your two answers. Remember that once you are here, you also maybe saw the pattern that your answer is just the opposite of this divided by the number in front if there is one, the opposite of this divided by the number in front if there is one. Okay, so you are done. You solved the equation x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0 and got that x equals -1 or x equals -5. That means if you plugged -1 in everywhere you saw an x, in here and in here, it would equal 0. Or if you plugged a -5 in for x here and here, solve it, you should get 0. Okay, let's go through another example. (2p squared minus 3p minus 4p equals -6. Remember, very first thing is standard form. You have to have the x squared, then x, then the constant equal to 0. So right now we do not have equals 0, so you need to start by getting this -6 over to the other side. Okay, so since it's -6, you would add 6, and you're going to add it to the other side. You should look first if there are any like terms over here. P squared, p, and p are not like terms with 6. If there were like terms, then you'd want to put it underneath that and combine those. Since there are not, you need to think about where does that 6 need to go? In the front, in the middle, or at the end? Well, because it's the constant, it should go in at the end. So I'm going to put +6 at the very end. That gives me 2p squared minus 3p minus 4p plus 6 equals, and -6 plus 6 is 0. Okay, we are equal to 0. Check. Make sure your terms are in the correct order. Squared, then not squared. Oh no, we've got an issue. It's a simple issue. We just have these two like terms that we need to combine. Okay, so 2p squared, and then we have -3p minus 4p. So -3 minus 4 is -7p, and then plus 6 equals 0. So now check again. Do you have the squared term, then the not squared, and then the constant? Squared, not squared, constant equals 0. Now we are in standard form and ready to factor. So remember to identify A is 2, B is -7, and C is 6. You need to start with multiplying your A times C, which in our case is 2 times 6. Multiply those to get 12. Now you need to use Desmos. You need to find two numbers that multiply to get that answer, which was 12. And those same two numbers need to add to give you B, which is -7. So this is where Desmos comes in handy. We come back to Desmos and just delete the ones I have. Instead of x times y equals 5, it needs to equal 12. And then x plus y is supposed to equal -7. I can move around and see where they cross. I see that it's -4 and -3. Those are my two numbers this time, -4 and -3. So like I said, it is not supposed to always be just whatever these two numbers are. That's not how it works. You need to use Desmos to get those. We got -3 and -4. So two sets of parentheses. The variable goes first in both. Then you do -3 minus 4 equals 0. Now we are not done in this case. In the last problem, A was 1, which is why right here we were done. But in this problem, A is 2, so we have one more thing we need to do. We need to divide both of our numbers by A. Now, in the 8-5 lesson, you learned that when you factored, if this didn't reduce or divide, you needed to take this and slide it in front. But here's the cool thing. In this lesson, you don't need to do that. You can just take your two sets of parentheses as is and set them each equal to 0. Now in this one, you should simplify this. 4 divided by 2, you know what that is. That's 2. You should simplify that one. But this fraction here can stay this fraction. And now you can finish solving. I'm going to add 3 over 2 to both sides. Gives you p equals 3 over 2. In this case, you add your 2. Gives you p equals 2. Or you had this and you know it should be the opposite of this, so make that positive 3 over 2. The opposite of this, make it positive, but then you do need to reduce this. You need to divide if you can. Divide or reduce. Okay, but do not forget about dividing by A. Next example. 2g squared minus 2g minus 3 equals 5 minus a squared. Starting out with, you need it to be in standard form. So we do not have equals 0, so we need to move things to where we can get it to equal 0. Now, it does not matter if you move the things from the left over to the right, or if you move the things from the right over to the left. I recommend you move the least amount of terms. So the left side has 3 terms, the right side has 2. So I would move these 2 terms over to the other side. So you have 5, it's positive, so you get rid of it by subtracting. When you look over here, you should look for like terms. Here's its like term, so subtract it from the negative 3. Then you have a minus a, that should say g squared. It is a g, it just got a little bit funky looking. Then you should add g squared. And if you look over here, look for like terms. 2g squared is a like term, so add g squared. 2g squared plus 1g squared gives you 3g squared. You didn't do anything with the minus 2g. Negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8 equals, cancels, 0. Now you are in standard form, squared, not squared, constant, 0. You can go to factor. Identify A, B, and C. A is 3, B is negative 2, C is negative 8. Multiply A times C. 3 times negative 8 is negative 24. Use Desmos to help you find what 2 numbers multiply to be that, which is negative 24. The same 2 numbers need to add to be B, which is negative 2. So change this to say negative 24. And change the bottom one to say negative 2. They cross at negative 6 and positive 4. So 2 sets of parentheses. Your variable goes first. Then your 2 numbers are negative 6 and positive 4 equals 0. Go back and look at A. It is 3. So you need to divide both of those by 3. You do want to check if either of them reduce. This one reduces. This is really g minus 2. But the other one can stay just 4 over 3 because it doesn't reduce. Then you can use those to get your 2 answers. And there are your 2 answers. G minus 2 equals 0 gives you g equals 2. g plus 4 over 3 equals 0 gives you g equals negative 4 over 3.